Hi, my name is Holly Joyce and this is my Unit 19 presentation on human immunity. Let's start by looking at pathogens. So what is a pathogen? A pathogen is an organism that causes disease. There are many types of pathogens which cause disease or infection in their own unique way. Firstly, there is bacteria. These are single-cell organisms which usually enter the body through the mouth, nose, or a break in the skin. After entering the body, they multiply and can make you sick. Meningitis and pneumonia are types of bacterial infection. Viruses are also pathogens. They enter the body and infest cells which they use as a host to survive and replicate. Viruses cannot survive without a host. COVID-19 and the common cold are examples of viral infections. Fungi cause infections such as ringworm and yeast infections. And lastly, parasites cause infections such as malaria. The immune system comprises of 3 lines of defence. The first 2 are non-specific and the third is pathogen-specific. Let's look more closely at these one by one. First line of defence consists of physical and chemical barriers. Physical barriers, including the skin and mucosa of the digestive and respiratory tracts, help eliminate pathogens and prevent tissue and blood infections. Moreover, components that are secreted by the skin or mucosa, such as sweat, saliva, tears and mucus, help to provide a basic barrier against invading pathogens. This slide shows the 3 different layers of skin: the epidermis, the dermis and the hypodermis. As long as the skin remains undamaged, it serves as an extremely effective first line of defence. Mucous membranes, also known as mucosa, are the membranes in charge of filtering out unwanted allergens, pathogens and any other substance posing a threat to the body while still letting nutrients in. These membranes line the eyes, nose, mouth, respiratory tract, GI tract and reproductive tract, basically any tract or cavity that is exposed to particles from the outside world. Glands within the mucous membranes produce a sticky substance called mucus. Pathogens become trapped by the mucus and are then eliminated from the body. We have 200 times more mucosa as we do skin, meaning that mucosa is the body's largest protective barrier. Microorganisms can also be eliminated by various acidic fluids produced by the body, such as stomach acid. They are unable to survive in an environment with such a low pH, and therefore they die. They may also be eliminated by the enzymes that come from mucous membranes, for example, lysozyme, which can be found in tears and sweat. Within the body, the urinary tract is a common place for infection, more so in women than in men, as the urethra is much shorter in a woman, making it easier for bacteria to enter. When the bladder is emptied, the urine flushes out most of the bacteria. However, sometimes not all bacteria is eliminated, causing an infection. The second line of defence is again non-specific resistance that destroys invaders in a generalised way without targeting specific individuals. Fever, inflammation and phagocytosis are all components of this line of defence. Fever raises the body's core temperature in an effort to eliminate pathogens, as they will find it difficult to function out of their optimum temperature. The higher temperature also helps immune cells to work better. When the body incurs an injury, the inflammatory response occurs. This response is the non-specific immune system's way of dealing with injury and infection. There are several cellular events that happen in order to cause the inflammatory response. First of all, the blood vessels enlarge to allow increased blood flow to the site of injury or infection. Next, holes appear in the cell wall, allowing immune response blood cells, which are large in size, to pass through and increase immunity in the area. Other cells that aid immunity will also make their way to the site of injury and will add to the inflammation in the area. Physically, the localised infected area will appear swollen and feel painful and warm to the touch. When an injury occurs, chemical signals are sent out to macrophages, which are a type of white blood cell, to engulf the foreign bodies, pathogens, and remove them. This process is known as phagocytosis. Third line of defence is pathogen specific. This system relies on antigens, which are specific substances found in foreign microbes. Most antigens are proteins that serve as a stimulus to produce an immune response. A pathogen will often need the antigen to be able to enter the body. Antigens are often proteins. They can also be carbohydrates, nucleic acids, and fats. A specific example of an antigen is the protein on a virus. Specific immunity isn't something that we are born with. It's learned, and it is also known as acquired immunity. When new antigens are encountered in the body, it learns the best way to deal with them and then creates a memory for the antigen. Lymphocytes are the white blood cells involved in the specific immune response. They produce antibodies that respond to specific antigens on the surface of pathogens. Memory cells remain in the bloodstream and lead to a quicker and stronger defense against a secondary infection by the same pathogen. We'll now look at the different types of immune cells and their roles within the immune system. There are 5 different types of white blood cell, which are also known as leukocytes. Each has its own role within the immune system. The most common are neutrophils. These capture and destroy pathogens by engulfing and ingesting them. Next are lymphocytes, 2 types in fact, known as T cells and B cells. T cells control our body's immune system response and directly attack and kill infected cells and tumour cells, while B cells make antibodies to target viruses, bacteria, and other foreign invaders. Monocytes are the largest of the white blood cells, and when they leave the bloodstream, they become macrophages and are responsible for eating any dead cells in the body through phagocytosis. Next are eosinophils, which are rare in the bloodstream and are associated with allergic reactions. They are important when the body suffers an allergy or a worm infestation. They release toxins to kill pathogens. The rarest of the white blood cells are basophils. These act immediately when an invader is present. They contain histamine, which aids dilation of the blood vessels, allowing immune cells to reach the site of infection more quickly. Let's talk about antibodies, or immunoglobulins as they are also known. These are the proteins that bind to antigens. More of these are made by the bone marrow when you have an infection. They travel through the blood and have a number of functions. They target infection, recruit immune cells, neutralize toxins, remove antigens, complement activation, stimulate phagocytes, and activate mast cells. Immunoglobulins are structured in a Y shape and are made up of 2 heavy chains and 2 light chains. The smaller chains can bind to antigens. There are 5 different immunoglobulins: AGA, IgA, IgD, IgE, IgG, and IgM. We can see the structure of these on the slide. The most abundant immunoglobulin in the body is IgG, which directly attacks any foreign bodies that it doesn't recognise, and is also the one that can be transferred from mother to an unborn child across the placenta to protect the baby from diseases which it hasn't yet been exposed to. Self-antigens are those that are found on the body's cells. The body is familiar with these. Non-self-antigens, on the other hand, are those which come from outside the body. The body does not recognise these, and so, consequently, a reaction within the immune system occurs. Non-self-antigens will be detected by the innate immune system, and the adaptive immune system, B cells and T cells, will respond. The level of response of the immune system varies dependent on the similarity between the antigen and the self-antigen. The bigger the difference, the stronger the immune response. Organ transplantation is the removal of a healthy organ from a donor and putting it into the body of a very ill person. This is usually a life-saving procedure. Organ transplants can go without complication. However, this is unfortunately not always the case. Sometimes the immune system will not accept the new organ because it sees it as a foreign body. The organ is then rejected. Rejection occurs when the person's immune system detects that the antigens on the cells of the organs are different, and so it attacks them. A process called tissue typing is used to find a close match between the organ donor and the organ recipient. The closer the match, the less likely it is that the organ will be rejected. There are medicines containing monoclonal antibodies that can be used during and after surgery to knock out the T cells which cause the immune system to attack, helping an organ to be accepted by the body. There are 3 main types of rejection that may occur with organ transplants. These are hyperacute, acute, and chronic. The most common is acute, and all recipients will experience this to some degree. Now let's look at two specific immune disorders. I'd like to look at rheumatoid arthritis and lupus. Rheumatoid arthritis is a long-term condition that causes pain, swelling and stiffness in the joints. The condition usually affects the hands, feet and wrists. There's no specific test that will give a diagnosis. Physical tests, blood tests and joint scans may be used to reach a diagnosis. Treatment of this disease is to manage and alleviate symptoms because there is no cure for it. Medicines, lifestyle changes and surgery may all be types of treatment for rheumatoid arthritis. Lupus is a disease that occurs when your body's immune system attacks your own tissues and organs. Inflammation caused by lupus can affect many different body systems, including joints, skin, kidneys, blood, brain, heart and lungs. Symptoms of lupus vary from person to person and will also depend on the part of the body that is being attacked. The severity can range from mild to very severe. Common symptoms are fatigue, fever and joint pains, along with many of the others that can be seen on the slide. Lupus is extremely difficult to diagnose because symptoms vary from one case to another. Combinations of blood tests, urine tests, analysis of symptoms and physical examinations can lead to a diagnosis. The treatment given for lupus will depend on a patient's symptoms. Various types of drugs can be used for treatment, including non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, anti-malarial drugs, corticosteroids and immunosuppressants. There are 4 types of immunity. Natural active immunity occurs when the body is exposed to pathogens that cause a disease. Once a pathogen enters the body, the immune system gets to work producing antibodies to eliminate this specific pathogen. Once this occurs, the B cells will remember this antibody so that when or if the pathogen is encountered again, it can act upon it rapidly, most likely before any symptoms occur. This is called immunological memory. An example of natural active immunity is that of the chickenpox virus. Once a person has had this virus, they're very unlikely to get it again because an immunity has been developed by the body. This type of immunity is long-term. The concept of artificial active immunity is much the same as natural active immunity. There is one major difference though. The body is intentionally exposed to a pathogen by means of a vaccine. And again, as the body is exposed to the pathogen, the immune system gets to work producing antibodies to fight the disease, which are then memorised so that in the future, should it be encountered naturally, the body will fight it rapidly and efficiently. This serves again as long-term immunity. As well as active types of immunity, there are 2 types of passive immunity. Passive natural immunity is when antibodies are passed from person to person, such as from a mother to her unborn child. This kind of immunity is only short-term, no longer than about 6 months. And passive artificial immunity occurs when a person receives antibodies produced by another person, either through an injection or a blood transfusion. This type of immunity does not stimulate the immune system and therefore only provides very short-term immunity, around 2 weeks. Most vaccines contain a weakened or inactive, killed form of the virus or bacterium, or a small part of the virus or bacterium that cannot cause disease. This is called an antigen. When a person gets a vaccine, their immune system recognises the antigen as foreign, which activates the immune cells so that they kill the disease-causing virus or bacterium and make antibodies against it. It also activates immune cells called T cells and B cells in the blood, in the bone marrow and throughout the body. Later, if the person comes into contact with the actual virus or bacterium, their immune system will remember it, which, as I said before, is called immunological memory. Herd immunity is achieved when around 70 to 90% of the population have immunity to a disease, either through natural immunity or by being vaccinated. When herd immunity is achieved, the likelihood of a virus being passed from person to person is low. This protects the community as a whole, even the people who aren't immune to the disease, as the probability of them coming into contact with an infected person is unlikely. During the recent COVID-19 pandemic, herd immunity was attempted through vaccination rather than people being subjected to the virus itself. The vaccination programme was set up by the government during the COVID-19 pandemic and still continues. People were offered the vaccine, which came in 2 doses. The vaccine was offered to the oldest in the population first, moving down by age groups and factoring in vulnerable members of the younger adult population early on too. Boosters have been offered since the initial rollout to provide a long-lasting immunity. A yearly vaccination against the flu is offered by certain groups of people, namely the most vulnerable, the elderly and children. Vaccines are also offered to babies and children against certain diseases such as diphtheria, polio and mumps, measles and rubella, which is the MMR vaccine, to name a few. These diseases have been near on eradicated thanks to the vaccination programs. With vaccinations being such an effective way to increase immunity to diseases, what are the factors that affect a vaccination uptake? Reasons for people being unsure of whether to have a vaccination or not vary from person to person. It could be the fear of side effects, lack of research into its development, allergies to the ingredients, or quite simply that the person has a fear of needles. There are also people who will absolutely refuse to have a vaccine through fear that it may be harmful to their body and cause things such as cancer. This group of people are known as anti-vaxxers. As long as the number of anti-vaxxers for a particular vaccine isn't too high, herd immunity can still be achieved. Many people believe that the COVID-19 vaccination was developed too quickly without sufficient research and subsequently refused to have the vaccination. However, figures of people in the UK were high enough for this not to be an issue. Historically, in the 1990s, concerns were raised following publication of studies claiming an association between natural and vaccine strains of measles virus and inflammatory bowel diseases, and separately MMR vaccine, bowel disease and autism. This meant people were reluctant to let their children have the vaccine. Although many were in receipt of the vaccine, some families refused on these grounds. Now to look at the benefits of vaccination. The most important being the eradication of diseases. As well as this, there are plenty of other benefits. Firstly, a vaccine protects you as an individual against diseases, some of which are life-threatening. In turn, this protects the people around you and the wider population. If more people are vaccinated and less people are hospitalised for these diseases, this eases the demand on the healthcare system. Looking at the COVID-19 pandemic, before a vaccine was available, the hospitals were inundated with COVID cases, and this put a huge pressure on the NHS. It must also be noted that vaccinations help with the reduction of antibiotic resistance and mean that life expectancy is increasing. To conclude, the advantages of vaccines by far outweigh the disadvantages all round. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much for listening.